"Dad's signing the papers today," my brother announced, and there was an ugliness in his voice that I'd never heard before, or maybe it had always been there, and I'd just refused to acknowledge it. "You're getting nothing. He finally sees you for what you are." He was standing in the doorway of my apartment in Los Angeles, holding a coffee from the place downstairs, acting like he was delivering good news instead of what sounded like a death sentence. I was sitting on my couch, which I'd bought for $400 at a thrift store because I was between jobs and didn't have the budget for furniture, and I watched my brother, whose name was Derek, whose name I was angry at in that moment, even though that was irrational, deliver this information like he was the herald of some kind of justice. Derek was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, sitting in my apartment that I was probably going to have to move out of soon, and he was telling me that our father had decided I was worth nothing. "Okay," I said, because what else was there to say? Arguing with Derek had never worked. Defending myself had never worked. For the past 8 years, since my father had decided that Derek was the responsible one and I was the unreliable one, anything I said in my own defense was treated like proof of my irresponsibility. "That's all you have to say?" Derek asked, and he seemed disappointed that I wasn't crying or angry or doing something more dramatic. "Dad cut you out completely. The house in Malibu, the investment portfolio, everything. All of it goes to me. And Mom's trust goes to me if anything happens to her, too. You get nothing." "Okay," I said again. Derek left, probably unsatisfied with my lack of emotional reaction, and I sat there on my thrift store couch and tried to figure out how I felt. The truth was, I wasn't shocked. My father had been threatening to cut me out of the will for years. Ever since I'd decided to become an artist instead of going to law school like he'd wanted. Ever since I'd left the investment banking job he'd arranged for me. Ever since I'd moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in creative direction that he didn't understand and didn't approve of. My father, whose name was Richard Ashford, had built his fortune in real estate development. He'd been successful and ruthless and absolutely certain that there was only one way to build a life that mattered. Through conventional measures of success. Money, status, power. Everything else was a waste of time. Derek had understood this instinctively. Derek had gone to law school, had joined his own firm, had invested aggressively in the stock market, had done everything my father wanted him to do. And in return, Derek had gotten the gold. I had refused. I had chosen art over security. I had chosen creativity over comfort. And now I was apparently getting nothing. The lawyer called at 3:47 p.m., which was exactly the kind of oddly specific time that makes you remember it forever. His name was Theodore Whitmore, and he'd been my father's attorney for the past 20 years. I'd never spoken to him directly before. "Mr. Ashford," he said, and there was something strange in his tone, something that didn't match the scenario I'd been expecting. "I'm calling regarding your father's estate planning. He's asked me to notify you of certain changes he's made to his will." "I already know," I said. "Derek told me I'm being cut out." There was a pause. In that pause, I could hear the sound of papers being shuffled, the sound of someone taking a breath, the sound of a man about to say something that was going to change everything. "Your brother is partially correct," Theodore said carefully. "Your father has restructured his will. However, the restructuring is more complex than what your brother apparently believes." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your father has divided his estate into 2 primary components," Theodore explained. "The first component, the house in Malibu, the investment portfolio, the cash assets, all of that has been left to your brother Derek, with the exception of a monthly stipend that will go to your mother if she outlives your father. That part, your brother is correct about." "And the second component?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The second component," Theodore said, "is a property in Mendocino County, California. It's approximately 42 acres of oceanfront real estate on the Sonoma coast. Your father purchased it in 1989 for $1.2 million. At current market rates, based on recent comparable sales in the area, the property is valued at somewhere between $18 and $22 million. Your father has left this property to you." I stopped breathing. "I'm sorry," I said. "Can you say that again?" "Your father has left you a 42-acre oceanfront property in Mendocino County," Theodore repeated. "The property is titled and deed secured in his name. Upon his death, full ownership will transfer to you. I have the details here if you'd like to discuss the specifics of the transfer process." "Why?" I asked. "Why would he do that?" There was another pause, And in that pause, I understood that Theodore was choosing his words very carefully, that he was being a lawyer who was bound by certain rules about what he could and couldn't say about his client. Your father indicated to me that he wanted you to have something that couldn't be argued about, something that was separate from the rest of the estate, Theodore said. He said that your brother would likely contest anything he left you if it was mixed into the primary inheritance. But a specific property, transferred directly to you through the deed, would be difficult to contest. Is my father sick? I asked. I'm not at liberty to discuss your father's medical situation, Theodore said. But I would recommend that you contact him directly if you have questions about his intentions. What I can tell you is that the deed has been prepared, and your father has asked me to ensure that you're aware of the property and its current value before he signs the final documents tomorrow. I called my father that night. He picked up after 2 rings, like he'd been waiting for the call. Hi, son, he said, and his voice was different than I remembered. Older. Frielier. Like something had happened to him in the time since I'd last seen him, something that had diminished him. Dad, I said. I got a call from Theodore Whitmore. Yes, my father said. I asked him to call you. Why? I asked. Why are you leaving me the beach property? There was a long silence. I could hear my father breathing on the other end of the line, could hear the faint sound of a television in the background, could hear the sound of a man trying to figure out how to explain something that didn't have easy explanations. Because I owe you an apology, my father said finally. Because I spent most of your life treating your choices like they were mistakes instead of treating them like they were your choices. Because I valued your brother for doing what I wanted him to do, and I devalued you for doing what you actually cared about. And because I realized too late that I had it completely backwards. What happened? I asked. Nothing happened, my father said. Everything happened. I had a cardiologist appointment last month, and she told me that I needed to start thinking about what mattered instead of what didn't. And I realized that what mattered was watching you try to build something you believed in. And instead of supporting that, I spent years telling you it was a waste of time. I didn't say anything. The beach property, my father continued, I've owned it for 35 years. I've never built anything on it. I've never developed it. I've just held on to it because I liked knowing it was there. But I realized that what I should have done was hand it to you a long time ago, before I died, so you could actually use it. So you could actually see what you could do with it. Derek is going to be furious, I said. Derek is going to have to be furious, my father said. Derek got what he wanted. He got the money, he got the status, he got the thing he was working for. You got the thing you didn't even know you needed. And I think, in the long run, you're going to be much happier. You don't know that, I said. No, my father agreed. I don't know that. But I know that I made a mistake by trying to force you into a life that wasn't yours. And this is how I'm fixing it. I drove up to Mendocino County the next morning, and I got lost twice because the GPS couldn't find the correct entrance to the property, and I had to call Theodore's office for directions. When I finally found it, when I finally drove through the gate and saw what my father had been sitting on for 35 years, I understood why he'd chosen this. The property was stunning. It was the kind of place that made you understand why people spent millions of dollars for views and access to nature. There was a cliff that dropped down to the ocean. There was a small cabin on the property, something that must have been built in the 1960s, rustic and weathered and absolutely perfect. There was a meadow where you could stand and see for miles in every direction, north to the redwood forests, south to the San Francisco Bay Area, west to the infinite ocean. I walked around the property for 3 hours, and I didn't think about Derek. I didn't think about my father's guilt or his deathbed conversions or his attempts to make things right. I just thought about what was in front of me. I thought about the light. I thought about the way the ocean looked at sunset. I thought about the possibilities. That's when the idea came to me. It took 2 years, but I transformed the property into something beautiful. I kept the cabin, but I renovated it, not making it modern, but making it functional, making it a place where people could actually live and work. I added solar panels and a rainwater collection system and sustainable infrastructure. I created a studio space where I could work on creative projects. And then I built something else, a retreat space for artists. I started small, hosting friends and artist friends, giving them space to create without the pressure of commercial success. Word spread. Other artists wanted to come. I started charging a small fee to help with maintenance costs. And then, because I couldn't help myself, I started thinking about how to make it bigger. I created Ashford Residency, a program where emerging artists could spend 3 months at the property working on their craft with access to mentorship, resources, and a community of other creative people. I partnered with art schools and creative organizations. I documented the experience and shared it online. I built something that was both beautiful and meaningful and completely aligned with who I actually was. Within 3 years, Ashford Residency was featured in the New York Times. Artists were submitting applications from around the world. The program had grown to host 6 artists at a time, each paying $8,000 for a 3-month residency. By year 5, I was running a sustainable, profitable, mission-driven organization that was helping to develop the next generation of artists. And I'd never have been able to do any of it without the property. My father died 2 years after he'd transferred the property to me. It was his heart. The cardiologist had been right about that. He'd had more time than he expected, but not as much as he'd hoped for. I was there when he died. My mother was there. Derek was there, too, though he'd spent most of the final weeks angry about the will and bitter about what he saw as favoritism. At the funeral, Derek approached me while I was standing alone by the flowers. "Congratulations," he said, and his voice was full of venom. "You got the real prize, didn't you? The property was worth more than everything else combined." "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't ask for it. Dad made his own choices." "Dad made his choices because you manipulated him," Derek said. "You made him feel guilty, and he rewarded you with the one piece of real estate that had actual value. Meanwhile, I've been running myself ragged working in a career I don't even like, just because I was trying to please him." "You could have done something else," I said. "You chose the career because you wanted it. That's not my fault." "No," Derek said. "But you chose to be the family failure, and somehow that made you the golden child. That's not fair. That's not right." I didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that would make Derek understand. Derek had built his life on the assumption that there was a correct way to do things, and that if you did the correct thing, you would be rewarded. He'd been right for a long time. And then he'd been wrong, and he couldn't process that wrongness because it would require him to admit that he'd wasted years pursuing something that didn't matter. 10 years after my father's death, Ashford Residency was hosting 20 artists at any given time, spread across multiple buildings and studios on the property. We'd expanded to include not just visual artists but writers, musicians, and performers. We'd partnered with universities and major arts institutions. We'd created a pipeline of emerging talent that was getting recognized and celebrated globally. I was making money, good money. More money than Derek had ever made in his law career, though I didn't point that out. The property, which had been worth $18 to $22 million when my father transferred it to me, was now worth $40 million, and we'd expanded the footprint by acquiring adjacent parcels of land. Derek had left law. He'd gone into real estate development, following in my father's footsteps, trying to build his own legacy. He wasn't particularly successful at it, and from what I could tell from the rare family gatherings we attended, he was unhappy. We ran into each other at one of those family gatherings, years after my father's funeral. Derek looked older than he should have. Derek looked tired. "So," he said, and there was no longer any venom in his voice, just a kind of resigned acceptance. "You really did build something with that property." "I did," I said. "Dad was right about you," Derek said. "He saw something in you that I didn't see. That maybe he didn't even see until the end, but he saw it." "Dad was right and wrong about a lot of things," I said. "But he was right that I needed space to figure out who I was supposed to be. And he was wrong for most of my life about whether that space mattered." "I should have just done what I wanted," Derek said, and there was something tragic in his voice, something that suggested he'd spent 10 years coming to a conclusion that I'd reached when I was 25. "Yeah," I said. "You probably should have.